in Masterprat, we talk about the issue of timing, and the way that we exist as a balance between a reactive system and a predictive system. So the reactive system, we could say that's our senses, body, basic reactions. But if we react to the world, you'd never be able to cross the road if your entire way of operating was based only on reacting. So then we have the predictive system, which is the mind on top of the brain. And the mind figures out the laws of physics, and if a taxi's moving at this speed, it's going to take this long to get to this point, therefore I can safely cross the road and ahead of it, and so on. And we can do things like catch balls and open doors and get in lifts, and even just the idea of getting the feedback from your phone when you tap it. All of that has to be synchronized. If you tap your phone and you get the icon flashes a second later, you think there's something wrong with the phone. It has to happen, at least as far as your perception is concerned, it has to happen instantly. And obviously, if we were all in the same classroom right now, if we were all in the All About You Centre, we would be in the same physical environment. That would be different to how it is now. But let's just try a little experiment. I'm going to just move in a certain way. And what I want you all to do is imagine that you're on a typical NLP practitioner training where you're being taught to get rapport by copying my posture and copying my movements. And what I'm going to have a go at doing is timing how long it takes. So from when I next say go up until when I say stop, I want you all to get rapport with me by matching back my posture and movements. Is that clear? Okay. So you can stop. The time between me scratching my head and me seeing the last one of you scratch your head was just over 2 seconds. Now, if I make an involuntary action and I see the person sitting opposite me, let's say in a sales meeting, make that same action and they do it 2 seconds after me, I'm going to be consciously aware that they're doing something. I'm going to start to think, that's weird. What are they doing that for? Now, we've got the delay of Zoom to take into account, the round trip delay. But if we take that out, we're still left with about a second. And that, I timed it deliberately between me scratching my head. If I timed it between my intention to scratch my head, you could at least add another half a second onto that. So what I need to see in order to feel that we have some sort of unconscious connection is I need to see your movement synchronizing perfectly with mine. And there's only one way that's going to happen, and that's if we're both responding to the same external stimulus. So there's something really interesting that came out of those 2 research articles that I found that are cited in the article on the website. I'll put a link to the headline article, and then this links onto the other articles as well. Basically, there have been a number of studies, research into how the activity within a person's brain will synchronize to that of another person. And really it's happening because these 2 people are both responding to the same external environment. So I think the first problem that we have in the way that rapport is traditionally taught is that it's about getting into a rapport with another person. And I think it's more useful to think in terms of getting into rapport with the environment. Because if there's something in the environment that's affecting one person, it would be affecting everyone who'd had the same experience to make sense of that. So if there was a certain smell or a certain sound, if there were a bunch of people in a room who all recognised that sound in the same way and responded in the same way, they would say, oh, I mean, what would people say if we were all in the classroom in All About You and there was a particular sound from the street outside and we all responded in the same way? What would you say or think about that? So if you can see people responding the same way as you, whatever's going on in their heads, we would infer is the same, and we would say they're like-minded. If you're feeling cold and you see somebody else doing this, you make some kind of connection with that person. You make eye contact. You signal to them in some way that you are in agreement with them. You might say something like, "Oh, aircon's playing up again, isn't it?" Or you would do something. And so when you go to something, I guess you all go to events like networking events, conferences, you all have the experience of walking into a room full of people you don't know. And there might be some people standing around in small groups chatting. There might be some people standing alone. And what is it, as you look into that room, what is it that makes you feel more attracted to one person as opposed to somebody else? And by attracted, I mean, I feel more inclined to approach and talk to that person. That person looks unfriendly, but that person that I'm looking at looks a bit more approachable, a bit more friendly. What kind of things is it that signal that to you, do you think? What if we look at people's behaviour in that example? What kind of behaviour, what kind of way of standing or moving, or what would a person be doing that might make you feel more drawn to that person? Over 15 years ago, I can't remember exactly when it was now, but about 15 years ago, I used to work with another NLP trainer, and we did a series of evening workshops at a local business community on networking. And one of the things that we found when we were modelling networking in order to create the workshops was going to networking events. There seemed to be some people who would go up to somebody who looks like they are engaging or more responsive, more open, more energetic, and they'd go up and talk to that person or join that group. And there were other people who would be drawn to the person who is on their own. And similarly, what we found was that people who were good networkers, who and the measure being at the end of the evening, they've talked to more than one person. So they've actually expanded their network by going to the event, which ultimately is the reason for being there. It didn't actually matter whether they were somebody who went up and approached others, or whether they just stood there looking nervous and other people came up to them. What always happened was a similarity that created that connection, and it was the similarity that then created the conversation. So somebody would go up to somebody who looks a bit sort of nervous and on by themselves and say, "I don't know anybody either," or "Is it your first time? It's my first time." That sort of conversation. And it was really interesting to see how people did break into groups. There was a guy who worked for an accounting company, and he used to talk about, the senior partner at this accounting firm, who would go into networking events and instantly walk up to a group of people, and this sort of circle of people would part like the Red Sea, as he put it, and allow him into the group. And this guy who was telling the story was terrified of networking, so he thought, yeah, he must be, what's he doing to get people to open up and welcome? Because he saw this circle as being this kind of fortress, of this clique that he couldn't get into. So he thought there must be something amazing that he's saying to these people to get them to open up and allow him to enter their group. So he said he went to one networking event and he positioned himself so that he would be able to hear what this senior partner said. And what happened was, the senior partner walked right up to the edge of the group and said, "Hello, chaps." And the group opened up and allowed him in. That's all he did. Yeah, that is literally all he did. He said, "Hello, chaps." And that was it. They were happy to talk to him. So I guess it was a clique, in that everyone, to some extent, is feeling a bit nervous or a bit out of place or a bit out of the depth or whatever, and anybody who looks like they want to engage and talk is actually showing that they're on the same side or on the same wavelength. And actually the person who circles around the group nervously, sort of looking at them, is actually behaving like a predator. If you watch nature documentaries, that's exactly what a predator will do. It circles around in the long grass until it spots a weakness. And so people, of course, are going to naturally become more more resistant to that sort of approach. So I think that's very interesting how in all of those different examples, what we're looking for is somebody who's behaving in a way that seems to suggest that they are experiencing what we are experiencing. And so coming back to what was in those examples of research, this idea about the brain activity becomes synchronized to the outside environment. So if we think about getting rapport not to the person, but getting rapport with the environment, then it changes the way potentially that we think about rapport. So for most of you, you'll have you've experienced my practitioner training where I don't teach at all how to get rapport. What we do practice is how to break it, because that's much harder and more useful, because you've been getting into rapport since the moment you were born as a survival instinct. So it's hardwired into us, the ability to get rapport. What's much harder to do is manage the degree of rapport that we've got. And as Valentina said, if you're in the client's story, that's a very comforting place to be drawn into the client's world that they're telling you about. And you want to stay there. And it's cozy, the client loves it, but it doesn't change anything. And if we want to be agents of change, we have to introduce a bit of discomfort into the process, because otherwise things are just going to stay the way that they are. Now, if you can make a living by having people come and see you for a chat once a week and things stay exactly the way that they are, then that's fantastic. Good luck to you. But I think all of you are in the process of helping people create change. And it raises the general point that if change was easy, they would have already have done it. They're coming to see you in order for you to help them enable that change because it's difficult, or because they imagine it's going to be difficult, or because they've got a lot of reasons for avoiding it, or they don't know which direction to go in, or whatever it is. But fundamentally, if they have the answers and it was easy, they would already have done it. And we know that because there are other changes they have already made in their lives easily. Things that maybe don't have the same emotional attachment, or don't have the same life experience connected with them that make them apprehensive or nervous or fearful. But fundamentally, if they could have done it without paying you for your help, they would have done. So the fact that they're sitting in front of you giving you money for you to help them change something means it's not straightforward. And they think, as we were saying earlier, that you've got some special skills or some special tools or some magic that you're going to use that they don't have, and then that will explain why you made the change possible that they couldn't have done by themselves. Now, if we're responding to the environment, one of the exercises that I've started doing on practitioner training is using Milton language to start to accelerate the process of change, or at least ease into the process of change. So what we do is we get a formula of language structure, and then we just put random stuff in it and see what happens. And some of you will have seen that I turned this into an app. So it's a smartphone app. So could one of you give me an instruction, a simple instruction, a one-word instruction that you might typically give a client, something that you want them to do? Relax. So we'll go for relax. So all I'm going to do is put the word relax into the box, click create, and it gives me, it's the same structure every time, but it puts random words into the structure. So what it's come up with is this. I'm curious how gently you will feel yourself able to relax with kind support in every moment. Isn't that lovely? There you go. All your years of hypnotherapy training wasted. Are you aware how easily you just love to relax with gentle support, would you? Imagine how often you can find it easy to relax with your safe feelings, aren't you? So all it is it's the same structure, puts random words into the structure. And in order to start to create an experience, a shared experience. And so one of the things that we do through that exercise in the practitioner training is we acknowledge the the way in which the client is coming into the room. So I'm sure as part of your hypnotherapy training, you've talked about how the client comes in and you don't start cold. You don't start, right, they came from somewhere. They came into this room with you from somewhere else. They brought some state of mind in with them. So you do something to bridge them from the outside world into where we are now. And we call that pacing, or we call that utilization. But what you're doing is you're acknowledging their current state of mind. And to take that a step further, you're starting to mind read and guess what that state of mind might be based on where they've come from, how they look when they walk into the room. And you're starting to pace and lead, because if they've had a terrible journey, or they've had a terrible morning, or they're flustered, or something's put them in a bad mood, and you want them to sit down and say, right, sit down, relax, and then you start your hypnotherapy thing, you might expect them to take a while to start to really sort of relax and tune in to what you're doing. So we've got to bridge them. And that's an example of, I think, this idea that we're in rapport with the environment, not with the person. And if we're in rapport with the environment, and so are they, then the same things in the environment are causing the same process of synchronization. So you might have certain things in the room. If you're doing hypnotherapy within a practice room, there might be things in that room, like certain art, or certain furniture, or certain colours. And those aren't chosen randomly. They're chosen because you expect them to have an effect on somebody. So you might have colours that are associated with the idea of calm, or you might have colours which are, as you put it, muted, so they're not a distraction. And some of you, I think, if not all of you, have seen a Derren Brown video where he is convincing Simon Pegg that he wants a BMX bike for his birthday present. Mm-hmm. And the only colours in the room are white and red. And suddenly everything red in the room really stands out. It stands out so much that you don't notice it. But of course, what Simon Pegg chooses as his ideal birthday present is a red BMX bike. So in a way, it's working in the same way. It's taking away other distraction, other possibilities. So we're creating this environment because we expect it to have a certain effect. And if it has that effect on the client, it's also going to logically have that effect on the hypnotherapist or the practitioner as well, I guess. If you're decorating the room to make the client feel relaxed, logically you would also feel relaxed, if that's a universal phenomena. And as I've talked about before, with the way that most people get taught rapport in practitioner training, part of the problem is they're working on the premise that it's a one-way thing. I'm going to get into rapport in order to influence you, not realising it's a cycle, that the client is also influencing the practitioner or the salesperson or whoever it is. So one of the challenges we have here, because we're working over Zoom, is I'm looking at all of you and you're not in the same room as me. So you're not responding to the same colours, the same lighting, the same ornaments, the same artwork, the same noises and events going on outside. You're each in your own different environments. So how does that affect rapport, do you think, in this sort of online meeting space? Yeah, and the disconnect in two ways, I suppose. The disconnect in time. So it's very difficult to synchronise and respond in real time to what the client's doing or feedback that they're giving you. And secondly, you're not in the same environment, so it's very difficult to use that and reference that. You can't control the distractions that are around them and so on. So only this much of the person's body is communicating with you. You have no idea what's going on in the environment around them. You might think the connection's great, but for them it might not be. And so all of these things are potentially going to get in the way of rapport. So does that mean that the information that we're getting in order to synchronise with another person is coming from a smaller and smaller space just on the screen? And when we did the master practitioner training in the autumn, Valentina and Patricia were in Valentina's apartment, and you had the big TV on, and other people were on laptop screens. And that creates a very, the size of what you're seeing also creates a different experience as well. And if any of you have spent any time in online meetings for your work, I think you'll have heard people doing this. I've been in a couple of committee meetings this week and last week where people would naturally doing something that had the effect of building rapport through this online medium. I think what a lot of people have tried to do is build something that's analogous to having a real life meeting, where you'd walk into a room and you wouldn't sit there and, well, there are meetings where everybody would walk in and sit in silence and not talk to each other, but for the most part you'd have some conversation with the people there before the meeting officially started, because not everybody arrives at the same time, not everybody's prepared. Somebody comes in and says, oh, I forgot my notebook, and then they go out and come back in again, and then somebody else is gone. And we've all been to meetings like that. So the fact that we know that happens, we've had that prior experience, we build on that. And just like you were saying, Angela, about we've all worked with each other before, so we've got a backstory to this meeting that we can draw on. Similarly, even if you're at an event online event where you haven't met any of those people before, if you've been to any kind of online event before, you're going to draw on that experience. And there are some things, like we said, trying to think if it was during master prac, it might have been trainer training actually, that still there are certain things we know about everybody. We know that everybody here is looking at a screen. We know that everybody here is in a room with some kind of computer or device that they're interacting on. We know that everybody's looking into a camera or has a camera on. There are certain things that we still know about people. And maybe that's a clue to how we might more effectively build rapport through this sort of medium. And again, in that Milton model exercise in practitioner, we say, so welcome to this quiet room. And you can take a seat in a comfortable chair, and as you begin to notice the relaxing colours in the room and so on. So we're using selection or restriction violations to start to create the shared sensory experience that's going to be conducive to the work we're going to do that with that person. Or I guess we could do the same thing through Zoom. You're probably sitting in a comfortable chair because it's your chair, I'm guessing, in your relaxing room. It's interesting when somebody's got a background on like Valentina has, because we don't know what's in the room behind her. Could be all kinds of things going on. I mean, I shudder to think what kind of things are going on behind Valentina right now. We don't know.
Better that I keep it on, eh?
Exactly, yeah. So we don't know. But there are always things that we can comment on, and through commenting on them, we're drawing them into the shared experience. And you've all done this in a utilisation exercise, I think, that we've done. So, whether a comment on the artwork behind Stormy or the plainness of Andrew, is that a wall behind you? Or it's not a background, is it? It's an actual wall. It's a wall. So comment on that, or the necklace that Angela's wearing. But there's something that we can comment on that brings these remote worlds together. And in NLP and hypnotherapy, we call that utilization. The previously, people would go out to work and they would consciously cross this divide between home and workplace. And when they walked in through the office door, they would be whoever they wanted to present to their colleagues. Whereas now, with people from working from home, these things are reaching into people's home lives. And we're seeing people's home environments. We're seeing some things going on in those home environments. So I was on a committee meeting for a school trust that I'm a trustee of last week, and the clerk is the clerk to the board. She was sitting in, I think, her dining room, I guess, and her husband walks into the room whistling, and she's like waving at him, saying, "Get out, yeah." So we get these little insights, and it makes it impossible, or very difficult anyway, for people to keep their private lives private. So you're not seeing everything that goes on in that person's life, but you're almost looking through a window into their spare room or whatever it might be. Hence people have backgrounds like Valentina's, or a plain background like mine, or things like that. So I find it interesting how that almost an intrusion of the work life into a person's home life, what effect that has on their sense of environment, their mental health, their sense of safety and privacy and so on. So that's got to have an effect as well. So I guess if we're working with clients through this medium, we've also got to be mindful and respectful of that as well. It's as if you've gone and done that session in that person's home. I pin Stormy to the screen and I make it full size. Stormy's now like almost life size on my screen, and I can inspect every bit of decor in the room behind her, and perhaps make her feel incredibly self-conscious. So I'll stop doing that. But yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we've got to be careful to avoid that effect. And if we go back to the research and the idea that the rapport comes not from the interplay between the people, but from the environment, we're having to create a shared environment that is this screen and camera, separate to the rooms that we're in, or at least somehow connect together the rooms that we're in. So again, that idea of connecting from whatever you were all doing before you clicked the button to connect, click the link, whatever you were doing before that point, however you felt before that point, we've got to bring everybody into this shared online experience, just as if they were walking into a practice room. So I think that's quite right. There are ways in which we can comment on a person's background which is perhaps intrusive. Since the pandemic and the lockdown start in the UK, which was back in March, it seems that every politician and expert who appears on TV news interviews, rather than going into the studio for an interview, they're all being interviewed over Zoom or Skype from home. So they've all converted at least corners of rooms into makeshift TV studios, and every single one almost has got a bookshelf behind them with very highbrow intellectual looking books on them. I had the experience a few weeks ago. Hang on a minute. So I had the experience a few weeks ago where I was talking to somebody about a podcast. So somebody wants to interview me for a podcast. And behind her was a bookshelf. And I said to her, "You got some interesting looking books on your shelf there." And made whatever small talk. I said, "There's one up on the top shelf that's caught my eye there." She said, "Oh, which one?" I said, "The one with the kind of stripes on the spine." I said, "What's that?" She said, "Oh, that's the NLP practitioner manual." I said, "Oh, that's interesting. Who's that by?" And she went and got it off the shelf, and she went, it's by you." "Yeah, it's by me." So that was nice. First time that's happened. But what an instant connection that made. I mean, in the space of a few seconds, I think she was talking to me, thought, "Do I really want to have this guy on my podcast? What's he got to say?" So it's a podcast about purpose. And so once she'd seen that, there was no question of it. And that was very interesting. That was weird. But yes, and I've commented many times about how people arrange these backgrounds to show the world through this little window exactly what they want the viewer to see. I want you to see me as a person who reads these really intelligent looking books, and behind me all I've got is a shelf with junk on it, so I've got a roller blind in front of it. But hopefully we're moving house soon, and I'm definitely going to have a nice bookcase behind in my background. And this is all about curating the way that we make our life look to the outside world. And when you walk out the front door and you control what people at work see of you, it's much easier than when you've got this camera letting people into your home. Where, you know, if I don't know if you all, I'm not asking you to do it, but if you were all to turn your cameras round, we might see something that's, you know, isn't quite as cozy and inviting as the corner we're looking at, or it might do, I don't know. When we're starting a session with a client remotely, what effect do we want them to create? Do we want them to feel awkward? And, you know, as I've heard a lot of people start meetings on Zoom, oh, it's a bit awkward, this, isn't it? It's a bit weird. Well, how is that influencing people to feel? So how do we want to influence people to feel in a way that's going to be aligned with their reason for being here? And then how can we structure our language to do that in that settling down period at the start of the Zoom session? And there's an interesting thing that comes up in sales training that I've seen going back, you know, 30 years in sales training, where salespeople were taught to build rapport by making small talk, asking the prospect about their hobbies, their kids, holidays, all that sort of stuff. And what happened is the longer they talk about personal stuff, the harder it is to change the subject and start talking about business. And what you get are these salespeople who will go and sit and drink coffee with a customer and never sell a thing. Because the longer they talk, the harder it is to change the subject. And so what I've always taught in sales training is by all means make small talk, but make the small talk about the thing that you're selling or the reason why you're there or something connected with business, which is not hard to do. But make the small talk relevant, and then you're building. You're not having to break rapport in order to then get onto the subject. And I suppose there's something similar there for when we're doing sessions with clients. If we start with how you doing, oh, terrible weather, and oh, lockdown, don't get me started, and, you know, sport or whatever. Anyway, about this problem that you've come to talk to me about. It's like a big, as Stormy just described, it's like we have to tear them away from one subject onto another. And what we're aiming to do is utilize where they're coming in, but also then as quickly as possible bridging across to connecting them into the experience or the state that's going to be most useful for the reason why they're here. And I wonder if that's one of the things, I think, going back to what Valentina said at the start of the session about being aware that she's getting drawn into the client's story. That as she said, that, you know, the longer we let that go on, the less effective we can be because we're running out of time in the session. So if we think about this from the point of view of bridging the experiences together, taking not only a snapshot of where is she right now, what's she wearing right now, what logically must have happened in order for her to be at this place right now. So now we're taking a snapshot and we turn it into a sequence of events. We're taking it into a time. So rather than saying you are in your bedroom and you are wearing comfortable clothes, how do we lead into that? How do we show that we understood the sequence of events that led her there? She must have gotten dressed and gone into that room. So not you are wearing comfortable clothes. She knows that. Notice how subtle the difference is. You are wearing comfortable clothes. It looks like you've made yourself comfortable. Because all of you prepared for this session. Angela said she's in an uncomfortable, cold room because then she wouldn't be disturbed. So all of you prepared for this. And the evidence is that you are here now. We start to think logically what must have come before in order for this to be true now. And how does that help me to lead on to where I want them to go next? I know that you all knew about this graduate group session beforehand. And I guess wondered what kind of things we were going to cover. And that means that you've prepared for it, and you've set the time aside, and you've all made the space available to prepare for it, and you're wondering about where this will take us next, I guess. So there's an example of connecting what must logically have happened before. Where are we now? Where do we want to go next? And it's wonderful how you've all made the time and the space available. And I suppose wherever you are in the world, or wherever you are within your homes, you've all made the right time and the right space available for us to have the session and the discussion that we've had today. And thinking about where that then leads us to, as you've all commented on in different ways, to bring things back to the forefront of your mind, to refocus on some of the simple aspects that we can, with a bit of attention and a bit of care, we can get a lot more value out of. So just to wrap up then in reflection, of course, the exercise that I got you to do earlier, to come up with the exercise, that was obviously the exercise, as you probably all figured out by now, that having a shared purpose, starting from a shared point of what the hell are we going to do, having that shared challenge created a shared space independent from the rooms that you're in, and hopefully to some degree you found yourselves absorbed within the conversation that was taking place, that you had that shared purpose, the shared challenge, you all starting in the same place from that, and then it was interesting the suggestions that you all came up with from that, a lot of which we've seen ordinary people doing on these sorts of group online meetings, and we can use our skills to take that a step further by thinking about what's the purpose of what's going on in that person's environment. What is, not only what's the story behind the candle, for example, but what story is that person telling us through the environment that they are willing to share with us through their camera. And just the same when we're meeting people face to face, what is the story that this person is trying to tell me through the way that they're being, the language that they're using, the clothes that they're wearing, the way they walk into the room. All of this is the person creating an environment around them, creating a shared experience, trying to tell me a story. What is the story that they're telling me, and how can I understand that story? And how does that allow me to understand the environment that they perceive is around them, and allow me to enter into that environment with them? And then that's creating rapport. And I hope you'll agree that's far more powerful and meaningful than just copying somebody just because they scratch their heads or whatever, which is trivial in my mind. So really joining people in their stories, to go full circle back to what Valentina said. If we're lost in their story, that might not be productive. But if we're joining somebody in their story in order to recreate that story with them, I think that could be tremendously powerful. And that's, I think, for me, is a far more interesting way to explore rapport than just getting somebody to like you or agree with you. So it's been a fascinating and very interesting session for me. And it's been wonderful to spend this last 90 minutes or so with all of you. And obviously, I think you've got the dates for future sessions. And if you can and you want to join, then I'm always very, very delighted to see you all.